Welcome to Narratives and Nightcaps, Books, Beverages, and Author Conversations. Today I'm joined by Flora Carr to talk about her novel, The Tower, a reimagination of Mary, Queen of Scots' often forgotten and darkest hour. Hello, Flora. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
So excited to talk with you. When I heard about The Tower and received a copy, I'm so fascinated by Mary Queen of Scots in this time period. I was like, "Oh, I cannot wait. I cannot wait to read this. I can't wait to talk with Flora. This is amazing." So thank you for making the time.
My goodness, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm also very interested in kind of like the Tudor era period, early modern period, Mary Queen of Scots herself, obviously. So that makes me so happy to hear.
I love history, and I'm obviously very envious that you live in London surrounded by so much history. I think that's so cool. So maybe you can talk to me about like some of your favorite spots at some point too, because I would love to know.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, right now, so I'm talking to you from my flat in London, and right now we're going through a heat wave at the moment, which the city is just not built for. I'm not built for. I feel like I'm giving, you know, that meme, the English frazzled woman. I, I feel, I feel like I'm her, but months too early. She should be coming out at Christmas, ready for the holiday, like Kate Winslet. But so yeah, I wouldn't visit kind of July, August. I think autumn, Christmas, springtime is all perfect. And yeah, there are so all across England, there's so much kind of rich history. I mean, I grew up in York, which is famous for the Vikings, and we have like an amazing Viking museum there. And there's just yeah, there's a lot of amazing history. I'm very lucky in that sense as a historical fiction writer. But I'm actually coming to the US later this year on a fellowship. And I'll be flying into Boston, and hopefully I'll have the time to do I've heard so many amazing things about the city's, walking tours, the
Yes.
American Revolutionary, walking tours, so I'm so excited for that, that'll be really exciting. Um,
Boston is a good place for that for sure, if
yeah.
you like to get into more of the US history. Very cool.
Yeah,
When are you coming here? 'Cause, I'm not gonna lie, they might have a heat wave up there depending on when you're
don't
visiting.
tell me that. I'm coming in September, for, a MacDowell Fellowship, which will be really exciting, and I'll be there for about 3 to 4 weeks, so that's New Hampshire. It's terrible, I don't know that much about the in-depth geography of the US, but I'm excited to learn more about, New England. It's an area of America that I've always been really interested in.
It should it should. Don't you're gonna, like, email me in September and be like, "Bree,
Free.
it it should be beautiful." Like, fall in New England should be absolutely gorgeous temperature-wise and with the trees and everything, so that should be the perfect time.
Yeah. Oh, I hope so.
Where whereas I live in Florida, and we have, like, a 2-week period that's great to visit. There's 2
What?
weeks in the entire year.
When?
Um,
When should we visit?
typically in April, so, like,
Okay.
end of March, beginning of April, there's a
Mhm.
2, maybe 3-week period if we're gonna stretch it and make it extra great for everybody. It's beautiful. You can spend time outside, you won't sweat, you can go to the beach, it's really comfortable. You might not wanna swim, but it's great to be there. It's so nice. We open up the windows. It's this nice little blip in the year where you think, "Yeah, this is why I live here."
But you guys, I'm so envious that I'm assuming you guys all have AC in every home, in every shop, everywhere, whilst that is just not the case in somewhere like London, which means that it's about 30 Celsius here, which I think is roughly 90 Fahrenheit, and, um, it might not seem that hot, but without AC in everywhere, and combined with the fact that all the buildings in London primarily, they were all built to retain heat.
Right.
It's just
They're all a lot older than a lot of our infrastructure
Mm.
here. As I was telling you, as someone who went without AC for about 2 weeks last year in Florida, I cannot imagine because I I was going insane. I was going absolutely crazy. I looked so frazzled and frizzy and just lived
Frazzled
in a
Florida woman.
yes, and lived in, like, a constant state of sweat. It was gross. So, how long is your heat wave supposed to last?
Oh,
Is there an end in sight?
I don't know. I We're not even in August yet, Brie. It's June when we're recording this. And uh yeah, I think the rest of the week it looks pretty kind of high 20s, early 30s Celsius, so pretty consistent. At some point I'm gonna have to get back on the tube on the London Underground, and that is not a nice experience in the heat wave because only a few of the lines have air conditioning. Yeah.
Ooh, that does not sound pleasant. I mean, it's been a very long time since I was in London, but when I visited London in August
Mm.
over 10 years ago, I thought it was beautiful. So I don't
It is beautiful. I feel if there are any English listeners right now that they're probably thinking that I'm selling the UK short, and I just wanna reassure everyone it's London is great. It's a great place to visit. You were talking about kind of historic sites. Uh, Only a couple of years ago, I visited the Tower of London for the first time. Somehow I'd missed that when I was a kid, and it's just such an amazing day out. I'd really recommend it. Yeah.
I had such an amazing time at the Tower of London. Well, it's so different from anything that we can experience here
Yeah.
and like loving history. I really enjoyed going to that. I have no photos from that because my friend got pickpocketed with my phone. So, a lot of my London photos
Oh, no.
some random person ended up with them when before they probably threw it in the trash, which is fine. Um, but it was very cool, so it lives in my memory.
Oh, no.
But oh, but you mentioned that York. Okay, I don't know why I like didn't think about this, but that there's a lot of Viking history, and my co-hosts that will listen to this, they will know that I am Viking obsessed.
Oh,
Like
really?
like anything historical fiction Viking wise, I'm like, I want to read it, I want to watch it, all of the above. I'm so obsessed with it. So now I'm like, well, dang, I need to go to York so that I can go to this Viking museum and learn more, actually see it in person.
It's not for the faint of heart, this museum. It's called Jorvik. If you Google it, they've basically recreated a Viking village, including the smell, which is very sp
So, is that like a really pleasant face?
it's is really specific, very pungent. Um, it is it is really fun. It's almost like a tiny mini, um, theme park where, um is it at, Disney World where it's, Small World where you go around on those little, oh, what are they called? Like
You're
the
in like a
roller
little
coaster, like, cart type things, but it's
okay.
slow and steady. That's what you're in. You're in one of those, and it goes round the village, and you smell the smells and view the recreative Viking village, and it is such a fun experience, but you just have to be braced for that.
I'm glad you at least prepared me with that because this I will do it at some point when I make
Yes,
it over
do
to
it.
England, and I'll likely have my husband in tow, and I feel like I need to preface what we're going we're wa otherwise I don't know that he wouldn't be happy with that surprise. So okay, good to know, good to know. Well, first, you do have a bit of a nightcap,
Yeah,
minus the fact that it's not a
it's
nightcap,
not a
which
night
is
it's not a proper
totally on par with the
It's
podcast.
it's
So,
an
what are we drinking?
so it's an iced coffee, not a nightcap because of the time difference and also the heat wave going on. Yeah, it's an iced coffee. What about you? Do you often have a nightcap for recording?
Oh, so I don't typically have like, oh, for today, oh gosh, do not judge me. I'm very much an iced coffee drinker. But right now, oh, I feel like anyone that's English that's listening might judge me really hard. But that's okay. I'm drinking an Alani Nu,
What's that?
which is an energy drink.
Uh-huh.
Um, I have a very unhealthy relationship with caffeine right now. I recognize it. I know that it's a problem, but it's sort of the state of life that I'm Um, so I'm drinking this Alani Nu, which is the pink slush. Not that anyone cares, but I like it a lot. But I'm very much an iced coffee drinker. So I love that you're drinking iced coffee. Are you also a tea drinker though, as well?
I'm gonna have to whisper this. I hope English listeners aren't will skip this next bit. I really hate English tea. I think I must be the only English person I know who doesn't enjoy a tea. Well, that's not quite true, but I think there's definitely a stereotype that we all love English tea, and I don't. Do you? Do you like tea?
Um,
It's okay.
no,
I
yeah, is it okay, safe space for the two of us.
Safe space, safe space.
Um, I'm not much of a tea drinker unless I am sick, in which case I do like when I only when I'm sick, I do like breakfast tea with honey.
How do you make it? Do you put the milk in
Oh.
first? I've heard a lot
I
of
don't
horror
make it. I
stories.
drive to Starbucks. I Flora, I cannot make tea to save my life. I have tried. It's not pleasant. I wish I cannot do it. I drive to Starbucks or to get the tea because and I know that that's so bad. And anyone in England that listens to this is like, wow, she's an American. And
I can make a proper brew. I just don't really enjoy the taste. I prefer coffee. But I am nervous for I like a green tea, and I heard really recently, apparently in America, you can tell me whether this is true or not. Apparently electric kettles aren't a thing. Do you guys
no,
you don't
not
have
really.
electric kettles?
Not most
But
people do not.
but how do you
Most
make how do you make like a herbal tea or something? Do you all have hot taps?
um no. Well, like, fancy people do, a coffee shop does,
What kind of
but
kettles do you have?
we don't typically use, like, a kettle for the tea.
Say kettle again.
Oh my goodness. We
You
don't
you're like, "Kettle,
kettle.
kettle."
We, um in another life, I would have one because I think that's the life I aspire to have,
Hmm.
and I do not have one, and I don't know a lot I actually don't know anyone that does. Um So they typically just have the hot water and then they put the tea bag and let it steep.
But it's not boiling water though, is it?
No, it's generally just really hot, or they just
Lukewarm.
boil it in a pot on their stove.
Oh,
I know. I, I
I
know.
might have to start Googling, travel kettles for my
Maybe it's different in New England. They're, a little bit closer to the ancestry. Maybe it'll be different up there, but I don't know anybody that does. I have some good friends from Boston, I can ask them for you and be
Yeah.
like, um, I'm gonna be like, "So I know Flora Carr now, and I need to help her prepare for her trip to Boston and New England, particularly with, knowing if there are kettles around
Yeah.
at normal places." Um, but no, so I'm not much of a tea drinker. I do enjoy a chai tea every now and then, which I know is not the same, but I do like chai tea. Um, I'm much more of a coffee drinker,
Yeah.
but I will say, when I was in England 13 years ago,
What are you gonna
I
say?
I did really like the tea that I had. I
Okay. Yeah.
obviously, I didn't prepare it, clearly, but I did really enjoy the tea that I had. I was pleasantly surprised as someone who doesn't typically like tea.
Good. Okay.
Alright, embarrassing moments over. Now we must talk about the tower. So, can we
Forgotten all
start with
about
just
it.
I know. Can you give us a quick overview for anyone that hasn't had an opportunity to read it yet?
Yeah, of course. So The Tower is my debut novel, and it's a reimagining of Mary Queen of Scots's imprisonment at Loch Leven when she was in her early 20s, and she was there for 11 months, and it's this island fortress on a kind of tiny island in the middle of a huge loch. Um, and in Scotland. And I like you were saying earlier, I'm a huge fan of kind of the early modern period and Tudor history, and I thought I sort of knew the broad strokes of Mary Queen of Scots's life. And then I came across this tiny reference to her imprisonment at Loch Leven, and I'd never heard about it. And I did a little research, and it turned out that period of her life on this tiny island, imprisoned by rebel lords, it was so action packed and full of drama. And I think with Mary Queen of Scots, her life is often defined by the men in her life, in kind of retellings. She was married 3 times, so her love life often takes center stage, or, sort of her half brother, the Earl of Moray, who sort of sought to kind of unseat her from the throne, sort of from the shadows. All these men in her life, also that also um, the like Sir Francis Walsingham, for example, after she fled to England. And I really wanted to look at her life through the lens of female friendship because she had this kind of close group of female attendants, many of whom were there with her for decades. And I just loved having the opportunity to kind of really zero in on this period of her life that I'd never heard of. I was certain that a lot of people hadn't heard of. It's often kind of skipped over in movies, for example, of her life. Um, and just focus on her friendships with the women. There are a few romances that occur during the book as well, which is really exciting to write. Um, but yeah, I think with the book, I don't know whether you other writers have talked about this. But I think some writers are very driven by plot, others are driven by kind of characters, and then some of them kind of have to visualize the location and the atmosphere first. And I think, I mean, I've only published the one book, The Tower, but certainly for The Tower, that the latter was the case where I really felt that I needed to go to Scotland first and see Loch Leven before I started writing. And I'm so glad that I did. I don't know whether you've ever been to Scotland, but it was so atmospheric, and
Haven't been. It is so high on my list.
yes, you should
Um,
go.
like, so high on my list. Partly because I'm Scottish, not that anyone would ever know, but, or I'm part Scottish, but I've, like, long absolutely just kind of admired that country
Mm,
and anything that's based there. I mean, fictional stories and everything. I'm a big Outlander fan, and that's
yeah.
partly because it's based in Scotland. Like, absolutely love it. So, tell me about your experience going.
Yeah, I'd been to Scotland before growing up in York. It's not a million miles away from Scotland, but I'd only ever really been to the cities, so for example, kind of Edinburgh and Glasgow. So going to Lochleven, it was such an amazing experience. I saw my first this is kind of beside the point, but I saw my first red squirrel there. I don't know whether I don't know whether you know much about the squirrel population in the UK, but essentially, red squirrels are originally sort of native to the UK, but with the arrival of the grey squirrel, I think from North America, kind of drove them out. And now you can only find them in very um, a limited number of places in the UK, including parts of Scotland. And they're quite shy creatures. And I saw my first ever red squirrel there at Lochleven, and it was honestly like a little fairy appeared in front of me, Brie. It was it was
Very
am it
Scottish.
was amazing. I'd always wanted to see one. And then, another amazing thing that happened was so to visit the ruins of the castle, which is on this kind of tiny island, you have to take a boat, from the jetty, and take you to the island. And they have about maybe 4 or 5 boats, but the one that was being used that day was the one called the Mary Seton, and she's one of the characters in the book. She's, one of Mary Queen of Scots's, ladies in waiting, and she appears kind of, halfway through the book, and she's a major character, and it just felt like this amazing twist of fate, and kind of I felt like, "Yes, this is the book that I need to write, that I want to write."
Very cool. That's such an amazing experience overall in that it truly, I mean, almost felt like fate for you in so many different ways to continue with this. I would imagine too that I mean, I consider going there even if in an early stage, a part of the research and all of that, and really absorbing the mindset and the just like that entire setting. I'm sure there was a lot of other research that went into this as well.
Yes, I did.
What but just well, like, what was that process like? And, I mean, more so okay, let me start with this. The process might be kind of a boring thing because then you're like, "Well, like, I read a lot and I did this." But what was something really surprising or unexpected that you learned in your research?
I did a lot of reading and listening to podcasts, and I mean, at the time that I was writing this book, I was still working a full-time job and I was planning my wedding. So it was quite an intensive period of my life. And I just crammed as much research as I could into like in between parts of my life. But I really enjoyed kind of researching the material culture of the period, going to museums and galleries and seeing what the actual physical objects of that period looked like, and um, sort of what their textures were. The even something as silly as sort of um, Mary Queen of Scots is quite famous for doing a great deal of embroidery during her kind of later captivities, and I'd seen pictures of her embroidery, but I'd never seen them in person. I'd somehow kind of missed seeing um, any of her embroidery panels in the V&A previously, but I went there and I viewed them, and that it's like this menagerie of lots of different animals that she embroidered when she was in captivity in England, but that they were really inspirational for me when I was writing the book. And there's one quite famous embroidery panel where it's a ginger cat sort of toying with a little mouse, and it is historians now believe that it's representative of Elizabeth I sort of toying with Mary Queen of Scots. So the ginger cat is Elizabeth I, who's famously redheaded, and Mary is saying that she's the mouse. That panel sort of inspired I decided to write a little ginger cat into the book as a sort of Easter egg, a little nod for fans of Mary Queen of Scots. And I have like a few little sort of references, Easter eggs in the book for uh real Mary Stuart fans.
I would say so maybe that's one I was kinda thinking about this too. I was like, when she was writing like, when you're writing historical fiction, especially
Mm.
for a figure like Mary Queen of Scots,
Yeah.
how do you balance the history part with, like, the creative demand? And, I mean, I sort of feel like that's one little example that you have, but what else went into your approach with this one?
Yeah, I don't know whether you've had any other historical fiction authors on the podcast who've ever spoken about this. I think that you have to always remind yourself, unless you are a historian in your day-to-day job, you are not a historian. You're a writer. You are writing in service for the reader. I did a great deal of research for the book. I put a lot of effort into ensuring it was sort of historically accurate. But at the end of the day, sometimes there were choices where I made it in service of the story, in service of the reader. Yeah, the what, sorry?
The women.
Yeah, exactly. Um, for the characters, and I think that I for the characterization of the 4 main women, so Mary and her 3 female attendants, Jane, Mary Seton, and Marie de Courcelles, who I nicknamed Cuckoo in the book. Obviously, we have a huge amount of um, material about Mary Queen of Scots. We know what she looked like, what her height was, her hobbies, what she liked to wear. Um, she is enigmatic because obviously she was having to communicate in code for a great deal of the latter part of her life, but we have a lot we know a lot about her in comparison to some of the other female figures that I was writing about in the book. And I think one of the great things about fiction is that you can sort of put female narratives and female voices sort of back into the fray. And that is something that I really relished doing, imagining what those women might have been like, because fiction gives you the tools of imagining that in a way that I don't think straightforward history can do. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Very, very cool. Um, did I read this correctly that you also, in your research, came upon Tudor era salad dressing?
Oh, yeah. Oh my god, yes.
How does
I
that differ from salad dressing today?
it's not too dissimilar, to be honest. Lots of there were lots of different types. A lot of them did have oil in. Some of them were sort of flavored with things like petals, for example. But I just never, when I set about writing the book, you never think in advance of all these small, tiny, rabbit holes that you're gonna go down when you're researching the book, and I would just remember at the time thinking, "Am I really spending a whole afternoon researching salad dressing?"
Like, people think about that too. I always think back to and I feel terrible that I don't even remember the author. I just read this article so long ago
Mm.
about her process with writing historical fiction. And she was saying, she goes, you're so into your writing, and then all of a sudden you'll get to a scene and you'll think, oh my gosh, have they even invented towels yet? Like,
Yes.
and so and she's like, and then you go down this rabbit hole to figure out when were towels invented? Do these exist today? And she's like, so you're writing just you'll go, 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 and then like that one piece that you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think this actually exists right
Yeah,
now is so interesting.
and you have to think so critically and question a lot of things as well, because you can read 3 different biographies, and each of those historians is going to be subjective and have their own points of view, not only on Mary Queen of Scots, for example, herself, but on events and how they unfolded, and kind of stories and myths that sort of sprung up. Um, I found this really fun little story that I'm certain isn't true, but is fun anyway, about Mary Queen of Scots. Apparently, she inspired the invention of marmalade because the story goes that she was so gorgeous that a French cook was making jam, he was stirring his pot, and he started thinking about how beautiful Mary was, and he stirred for too long and the jam turned into marmalade.
Goodness. That's oh, that's so funny. So, wow. Okay, you do. You and I feel like there is with people like Mary Queen of Scots and just other figures like that, there's all this lore and these little
Mm.
stories that you're like, that can't be true.
I
But
yeah,
it's
I think with Mary, it's often the case that people already have preconceptions about her, and usually it's either that she's kind of the doomed romantic, ultimately passive, Scottish queen, or she's this scheming Jezebel to Elizabeth I's, virgin queen. And I think one of my goals for the book was to set out to present a different Mary and sort of show the readers what kind of person she really was. And from what we know, she was incredibly charismatic. Um, she inspired these sort of extraordinary levels of devotion in men and women. We know about the men, but I think less is known about the women. Um, so often people had they felt enormous loyalty towards her. She was very cunning and intelligent, and very brave. I mean, she embarked on multiple daring escape attempts throughout her life, including in this book, a couple of times. And I just think she's such a interesting figure, and she's not just this one-dimensional thing that uh, people have their preconceptions about.
absolutely. No, I love that you've like brought in this just whole new perspective and just for really like one brief period in her life that, as you said, people just kind of glance over because I did not consider myself an expert on her by any means. However, I was just as guilty of like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't even, like, realize or recognize that this had happened, that this time period had happened." Um, I also read that you wrote this longhand. Yes?
Yes, I wrote most of it longhand. It got to a point where I realized that I just had this little pile of notebooks that I'd written it all in. But I think I was partly inspired by, firstly, I just enjoy writing longhand. I think it comes sort of more naturally to me. And then also I read somewhere that, the author Cullum Tobin, he writes everything out longhand and then he types it up, and through that process, he's kind of already editing the book, which I just thought was really might be really helpful. So, with this second book that I'm writing, it's a little bit more of a mix just for practical reasons. But I just love the process of writing longhand. I just think it's a lot more, yeah, it just comes more naturally to me, I think.
Yeah, I so this is gonna be just a weird connection to it, but I was talking to and I'm not a writer. Um, but I, was talking to an author recently, and she, one of the things she said to me just has really it's stuck with me ever since. It probably plays in my mind, like, once a day, and she goes, "There's merit in wrestling with your words." And ever since she said that to me, I have been thinking about how when it comes to typing and everything, and I'm someone who my job, I'm in front of 3 screens almost the entire day, and I do a lot of writing for various different things.
Mm.
Um, and lately I've found that if I'm, like, really struggling with what to say, I can't do it on the computer. I have to wrestle with the words and actually write them out.
Yes.
And that has made such a difference for me because if I sit and stare at a screen and try to think of what I want to say, I can't I can't get the words to come out. But if I do the exact same thing and want to put it on paper and write it out, I have such an I don't wanna say it's an easier time, but it's truly the act of wrestling with the words and then finding what I want to say, and I can write it down, and then I can bring it to the computer.
Yeah. I totally agree with you, and I think naturally I'm a lot more, I think I'm just a more analog person. Um, I yeah.
What did you enjoy most about writing or that writing process?
Do you mean writing it what
I
writing
mean, the
down?
entire thing, either writing by hand or just the entire process of all of it. Was it uncovering the story as you were doing it? Was it the research? What was your favorite part?
I did I love the research. I have to say, I was writing I started writing it, during, was it 2021? It was definitely when the pandemic was still ongoing, and I think perversely, because the tower is, quite claustrophobic in a sense, in that it's set in the one location, on this island. But I think going through lockdown, I found it really cathartic to write about that and to, write these women into this space, knowing that I'd be allowed to let them out at the end, because the book starts and ends on kind of the edge of the loch. We never we there are some kind of minor flashbacks, but the kind of present day narrative, as it were, it never leaves the loch itself. Um, and without going too much into spoilers, although with Mary Queen of Scots, it's, it's interesting, like, dealing with that whole issue of spoilers anyway, but
I'm sure. I know. I'm so used to me telling you, I'm like, without spoiling too
yeah,
much.
I
And I
know
feel like I just naturally sit there and then I'm like, I don't want to give the whole story away, but we do know
we know
where
what
it's going.
happens to her, but we don't it with her and the women, I think it's okay to say that they do leave the tower at the
Yeah,
end of those 11 months, and so that process was quite cathartic for me.
that's very, very cool. And then on the flip side,
Mm.
what was the hardest part? Was was there a challenging scene or I guess or I mean anything, which element I guess was the hardest?
I think, just from, like, a technical point of view, when you're writing historical fiction, you're often following, um, sort of plot points that have already been set out for you, um, which can be really helpful, especially as a first-time author. Um, but with Lochleven, and Mary's time there, there was a lot of action sort of in the immediate months after she first arrived, and then there was a little bit of a lull, and then there was lots of action near the end. And when I was first planning the book, that lull I was quite nervous about. But then because I had to think so much about it, about the kind of winter scenes, because I had to think about that and really plan more sort of character plot, as it were. I actually ended up really enjoying writing that. It felt more free in a sense, because I wasn't following those that rigid structure that history had already kind of laid out for me.
That absolutely makes sense. We've kind of touched on it a lot, but I guess what conversations do you hope the tower sparks for readers about, I mean, about women's power,
Yeah.
relationships, friendships, forgotten history, any of the above?
Yeah, I think I really want the tower to place a spotlight, not only Mary as I think she was, or my Mary, as it were, um, but also on the female attendants that she had with her, the kind of the women in the shadows. Often when you watch a historical drama, I don't know whether you've seen Wolf Hall, but often there'll be a little crowd of uh, female attendants attending on, for example, Anne Boleyn, and they don't really say anything during the scenes, they're just sort of there. But obviously they're listening, they're observing, they have their own thoughts and feelings and opinions, and behind closed doors, they might express those to each other, uh, to themselves, to other people, maybe even in the right situation. For example, if there's just 4 people in a room and societal, um, divisions start to blur a little, for example, as they do in the tower, maybe they can talk more honestly to someone like Mary Stuart. And I think that was really interesting for me to write and hopefully exciting for a reader to read.
I think so. Well, it kind of brought to life like I've always been somewhat fascinated and guaranteed. I have not seen these really in person, but photos of often tragic moments for women, including Mary. And every now and then you'll see, or like the ladies in waiting or one will be in the background of the painting.
Mm,
And the emotion that is often captured there too, but it's not the focal point of what everyone's looking at. So they're just kind of not disregarded, but people don't really pay as much attention to that. And so I sort of connect your story to that too, because it kind of brought a light to those people that are they're there normally in the background. They're just sort of overlooked, but they have so much of a story and so much more involvement too. And if you did just look like just turned your gaze slightly, you would be able to see that too.
I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, that's exactly what I set out to do, yeah.
Very cool. And you are working on a second one, which that I know you cannot spoil. But is there anything you can share about either the theme
Yeah,
or era? Or if it truly is just Brie, I'm writing a second one. That's all I can say.
I I'll say that very ironically, it's set during a heat wave.
So you're really in your element right now.
I'm really immersed right now. I proper on the ground research.
Just like a true writer. Oh, oh my gosh. Okay, I can't wait. I can't wait then for more. Now I'm gonna think back to this and oh, oh, that's so funny. Are you on any sort of like tentative timeline, or I guess what's your day-to-day like too? Because you're also working and writing, so what does that look like?
Yeah,
Because
I
I don't know that everyone always recognizes. I think because you are an author and I get to talk to a lot of authors, like I know that so many are juggling a lot all at once, but a lot of readers don't necessarily see that side. So what is that like for you?
yeah, so I work part-time now rather than full-time, and then I'm working on book 2, and it can be intense juggling, particularly with, and I'm sure a lot of your previous guests have spoken about this, but there is this stereotype of like the book 2 blues. And it is taking a lot longer, partly because I've been more ambitious in the scope of this book, in that there are fewer sort of real life plot points that I'm following, and a lot more of my own invention is going into the plot itself. I am really enjoying it and enjoying the freedom that that gives me. It just is taking a little bit longer.
It just makes me excited. So, but that's awesome. Well, you're very busy, but since we also just love to talk about books in general
Yeah.
on this podcast, is there anything you've read recently that you've really liked, or do you just have a go-to favorite that you love to tell people about?
Oh, I I know I already mentioned Callum Tobin earlier in this episode, but I went and saw him give a talk earlier this week, actually, in Hyde Park, and he did a talk about his latest book, Long Island, which is a sequel to Brooklyn. Um, and I've been rereading it since that talk, and it's just so beautifully written. The prose is so sparse. Um, yeah, I just admire his writing so much, and I really want him to write a sequel to Long Island. And he talked about how he wasn't sure whether he was going to do that or not. And I'm really keeping my fingers crossed that he does, because it without spoiling too much, it ends on a little bit of a question mark. And I really hope that he lets us know what happens to Ailish, what happens to the other characters in the book, because I feel like I'm so attached to them now.
That's so beautiful though. I love it. I just love when any book does that for somebody. You get so attached to the characters. I don't know what that says about us as readers that we get so attached to fictional people oftentimes, but I think that's okay. So I'll have to add that to my TBR list for sure. So this has been such a wonderful conversation. If other readers or writers want to connect with you, follow along, where is the best place for them to do so?
I've had such a good time. Probably I'm on Instagram, at Flora Carr 13. Someone asked me whether that was a Taylor Swift reference. It's not. And then on Twitter, X, which I'm on less now, it's at Flora Carr _
Okay, we
and
will
also Blue
definitely
Sky.
we can definitely link to those 2 in the podcast notes to make it easier. I don't know the last time I was on Twitter, but I'm happy to put
Mm.
your handle there. Um, Laura, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me to talk about the heat wave, to talk which I really hope that it lessens and cools off for you soon, because that is no fun, but also just for talking about the tower and your entire process and this um really fascinating and incredible story and your take on it and the perspective. I'm just so appreciative that you took the time to tell me more about it.
Thank you so much. I've had so much fun.
Me too. You'll have to come back for the next book.
I will. I will.
Okay, awesome. Cheers.
Cheers.